When a child goes missing, entire communities turn out to search for them. But the people of Towanda, Kansas weren't given that opportunity because Adam Herrman's adoptive parents, they said he went back into state care, and it took 9 years for anyone to realize this was a lie. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to today's 12 Days of Crimelines. We are on day 6, so this makes us halfway through. I'll have a couple more done by the end of the year, and then we'll finish up the rest in January. Also in January, I am going to be at a podcast meetup, the first one of 2026, and it is going to be in Los Angeles on January 8th, and it is from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Bigfoot Lodge, which is somewhere in Los Angeles. I've never been to Los Angeles before. I'm very excited to see what I can see. I'm there with my friend Josh Hallmark from the podcast True Crime Bullshit. We are actually in LA for a different reason, but we thought if we're both in the same place at the same time, we should do a podcast meetup. He said the LA meetups always have a great turnout, so I will hopefully see you there. I'll put the details in the show notes. And of course, they'll be on my social media. I know it's not a lot of notice, but that's kind of how we're working these days. So with that announcement out of the way of the podcast meetup, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. Like a couple of the episodes I'm doing during these 12 days, I have covered this case in the past for a different podcast. It has been several years, and it doesn't look like the original episode is even available at this point. So I had a basic outline in my head of this case, but I headed over to newspapers.com to start the research from scratch. They're always updating newspapers there and uploading more, so I wanted to see if I could find more information, and of course I did. I do want to give a quick warning that this case does involve some discussion of child abuse, which is not a topic I cover here a lot on Crimelines. We all have cases that are harder for us to handle, and child abuse cases are those for me. But this case really needs publicity because it's still unsolved, and beyond that, the family has a strong message to the general public about if they ever find themselves in a similar situation, and we will get into that message later. We are starting with Adam Herrman, who was born Irvin Greninger III in June of 1987 in Wichita, Kansas. I'll get into the name change in a minute, but for the sake of clarity, I am just going to call him Adam for the whole episode, because if he's out there, that is the name he would be using. By the time Adam was 18 months old, his parents had separated and his mom had custody of both him and some of his siblings. The total number of brothers and sisters Adam had is inconsistently reported, but we know Adam was living with his mother and at least 3 siblings. There was an older sister, there was Adam, and then there were 2 younger ones. Adam lived with his mother and siblings until he was between 2 and 3 years old. His birth mother admitted she was not a great parent to her children at the time. She was rather young, she had several small children, and she was on her own. But after she left bruises on one of Adam's older siblings, child services were called in and they were all removed. The 4 kids we are sure about were kept together initially and placed with Valerie and Doug Herrman in Derby, Kansas, which is a suburb of Wichita. The Herrmans had always dreamed of having a large family, and after having 2 biological children, they found that having more was not working. They signed up to be foster parents with the hopes of adopting a sibling group like this, so they were happy to have the chance to take in 4 kids at once. Adam's birth father said he did try to get the kids out of foster care, but he wasn't able to. And eventually, the kids were sort of split up. Adam's older sister only lived with Doug and Valerie Herrman for about a year before she went to a different foster home. No one has said why she was removed, but right about the same time, the Herrmans ended up losing their foster care license after an investigation. The parents said they did not lose it due to accusations of abuse, and the other 3 kids, including Adam, did stay in their custody. But we don't know what really happened. That type of information is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. In spite of losing their foster care license and not being allowed to take in any more children, the Herrmans were allowed to keep Adam and his 2 younger siblings. And then after Adam's parents lost their rights to the kids, the Herrmans were allowed to adopt them, which they did in 1993 when Adam was about 6 years old. And that is pretty much the last time the Herrmans had any contact with Adam's birth family. His older sister, the one who had been removed from the Herrmans' home, got a letter around Christmas time from Adam and the younger two, and their birth mother got a photo with Adam's new name, Adam Joseph Herrman, written on the back. And then they never heard from Valerie or Doug Herrman again. Adam and his siblings spent most of their early years with the Herrmans in Derby, Kansas, though Adam's school situation wasn't very consistent. He attended 2 different schools before the 4th grade, which is when he was then enrolled in a 3rd school in the Derby public school system. He wasn't a bad student, but he did have a lot of energy and he had impulsive behavior. But he was remembered by pretty much everyone as a people pleaser and a really sweet kid. And again, that's according to pretty much everyone, but I will note the exceptions to this are his adoptive parents, Doug and Valerie. According to them, Adam's behavior was, at times, out of control, and they struggled to discipline him. They did have him in counseling, and in November of 1996, when Adam was 9 years old, that counselor hotlined the family after seeing bruises on Adam. Valerie admitted that she had hit Adam with a belt, something she claimed she told herself she would never do. She was disciplined that way as a child, and she never wanted to do that to her own children. Adam was removed from the home during the investigation and sent to Wichita's Children's Home, which is where emergency placements usually go. After Child Services talked to Valerie and Doug and explained to them that it is inappropriate to not just hit a child with a belt, but to do it hard enough to leave bruises, the Herrmans promised they would never do it again. After 2 days, Adam was returned to the home. Just a bit over a year later, on January 9th, 1998, the family was reported again. This time it came from Adam's school where he was a 5th grader, and they called the police directly rather than Child Protective Services. Adam had returned to school after Christmas break with healing bruises on his face, specifically on the bridge of his nose, and he had scratches on his neck. Adam explained that he was outside playing football with his siblings, and that is where all the injuries came from. When the police reached out to Valerie and Doug, they said the same thing. These injuries were just from playing rough. I have to say that I think it was interesting that the school called the police over something Adam explained so easily. If I noticed bruises on a kid and I asked them about it and they said, "Oh, I was just roughhousing with my sister," or "I was just playing football," I would accept it. The people who work in schools are used to seeing kids with bumps and bruises. Half the bumps and bruises my kids get are from the playground at school. So I am left wondering if the injuries were not consistent, in the school's view, with playing football. Or if they had seen things before, little things, and they were keeping an eye on the situation. So when Adam came in with more injuries than normal one day, they called it in even though he seemed to have a reasonable explanation. But then I also wonder, was it how he delivered the explanation that concerned them? I mean, how often do we hear about abuse victims having vague stories about how they fell or bumped into something to cover up for injuries? Whatever it was, the school was concerned enough that they called the police. But because Adam and his parents told the same story, the investigation didn't go anywhere. Then, 5 days after this, on January 14th, 1998, 10-year-old Adam ran away from home. The family made a report with the police, but he came back on his own about 2 hours later. According to Doug and Valerie, this was something Adam continued to do after this point. He didn't do it all the time, but probably every month or two, he would get mad about something, run out the door, and then come back an hour or two later after he calmed down. Aside from the initial incident, it doesn't look like they reported any of these other running aways to the police, either because Valerie characterized it as attention-seeking behavior and she didn't want to give him the attention, or because they didn't actually happen after the first time. We don't know because Valerie and Doug, as you will see, are not what we would call reliable narrators. Within about a month of the school reporting Adam's injuries to the police, Valerie, Doug, and the 3 kids moved about 30 minutes from Derby to the town of Towanda, Kansas. Valerie had gotten a job managing a mobile home park out there, so this does appear to be a pre-planned move. They pulled all 3 kids out of the Derby schools and then enrolled 2 of them in the Towanda schools. The exception was Adam, who Valerie had decided to homeschool. It seems the decision to homeschool was made between the time the school called the police and prior to the move to Towanda, because records show that Valerie registered her homeschool on January 26, 1998. Homeschool laws, for those who don't know, vary widely from state to state. As a former homeschooler in Missouri who lives on the Kansas state line, I can tell you that in Kansas, a homeschool is recognized as a non-accredited private school, so you have to name and register your school with the state. This is a one-and-done deal. You do not have to re-register every year. You do not have to turn over records. You do not have to have your curriculum approved. You do not have to be working under a licensed teacher like in some other states. When you're done homeschooling, it is recommended that you mark your homeschool as inactive with the state, but I don't know that people even bother because there's nothing to do. You register with the state, and then it's not like every year you have to file a report or do testing with your kids to stay in compliance. You just have to register. When Valerie notified the Derby schools that she was pulling the 3 children out of school, she said it was because they were moving. It does not sound like she notified them that Adam would be homeschooling, which she was not required to do. She was only required to tell the school she would be removing him from their district. And that's what she did. Valerie said that she and Doug chose homeschooling for Adam because the traditional school setting was not a good fit given his behavioral issues. But I'm just going to once again point out the timing. She, and I assume Doug, made this decision to homeschool only after the school called the police on them. That is when school became such not a good fit that they had to remove him. Adam homeschooled for roughly 15 months when at some point in May of 1999, Doug and Valerie told the family that they had to make a difficult choice. Because of Adam's behavioral issues and their inability to handle them, they returned him to state care. He was about to turn 12, and over the years, he had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. And according to Doug and Valerie, his psychologist also said it was possible he had either a schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. To be perfectly blunt, everyone in the family who heard Adam was returned to foster care was relieved for him, because for years they had seen evidence of mistreatment towards Adam, treatment his siblings didn't endure. What was witnessed ranged from Valerie being mean to Adam, yelling at him, cursing at him, nitpicking him, and making him do chores while the other kids were allowed to play. And then it escalated all the way up to full-blown physical abuse. The stories that have come out are awful. Both of the Herrmans' biological children have said they witnessed abuse in the home from Valerie towards Adam. And Valerie's siblings have said the same. The stories included Valerie slapping Adam, hitting him with a belt, pulling his hair, and pushing him. And one accusation that came from multiple sources was that Adam would be confined to a locked bathroom in the house. One person said that one time she even saw him chained to the bathtub faucet. You might wonder why no one said anything or reported this to the police, but it is not entirely accurate to say that no one did. One family member said they did make a report, but whatever happened there has not been made public. the Herrman's biological son, has said he called the police when he was just a child. He was 11 or 12, and Adam was probably around 4, so this is before the adoption. Valerie was physically assaulting Adam, and her son was trying to get her to stop. But between the time he called the police and they arrived, Valerie talked him into telling the authorities that he had lied. He ended up getting a lecture about not lying and calling the police for no reason, and that was it. Valerie tried to justify how she treated Adam within the house by telling the other children that Adam had been threatening them and she was protecting everyone. But there are people outside the home who saw signs of abuse as well, like Valerie and Doug's son-in-law. He said he saw Adam locked in a dark bathroom about a year before he left the home, and when he got Adam out of the bathroom, he saw bruises. So he decided to confront Doug about it. Everyone has said the same thing about the dynamic in the house. Valerie abused Adam, but Doug never laid a hand on him. He definitely knew what his wife was doing, though. One of their kids said he would even sometimes step in to stop Valerie when she wasn't stopping herself. So knowing that, going to Doug may have seemed like a reasonable step. And the son-in-law let Doug know that he was going to the authorities if he ever saw anything again. He was basically giving Doug a chance to step in as a husband and a father to stop it. According to him, Doug said they were starting family counseling, and the next time he saw Adam looked fine. But this is really at the heart of the message for the public that I saw the family repeat in article after article. Report, report, report. Don't think one report was enough if you don't see anything change. Don't expect the quote-unquote non-abusive parent to find a way to stop the abusive one. If they've enabled it for years, they would have stopped it already if they were going to. So just go to the authorities and tell them what you saw. Get it documented every time and leave that paper trail. So the next time a call comes in, maybe from a school, maybe from a doctor's office, they will see a pattern. That's what Adam's family wants people to take away from his story. Report abuse when you see it. There have been no accusations of direct abuse in regards to the other children in the home that I have seen. Multiple people have said they felt like they had to tiptoe around Valerie to avoid setting off her temper. No one got the rage that people allege Valerie took out on Adam. And that isn't atypical. Abusive parents are not always abusive to all of their kids, or they aren't equally abusive. It's not uncommon for them to single out the one they think is the problem child, or a child they can't handle, or a child they simply resent for some reason, and then take out their abuse on that one child while the others are treated better. And in some dynamics, it's actually the opposite, where one child is raised up as the golden child and gets treated better than the others. That doesn't mean that the abuse does not leave scars on all of the children, even those who were not abused directly. Many carry large amounts of guilt over it, like a survivor's guilt. They feel guilt for avoiding the abuse. They feel guilt that their behavior would sometimes trigger the rage that would then be directed at a different sibling. Sometimes they think they should have done more to protect their sibling, even when there was nothing they could reasonably do because they, too, were children. And that kind of sums up what seems to have been the motivation for the Herrman's oldest daughter, Crystal, to look for Adam after he was an adult. She had not forgotten about the little boy her parents adopted and then sent back to the state. She remembered what he went through in her parents' care, and she wanted to, 1, see how he was doing, and 2, apologize for what he experienced within their family home. Crystal turned to the internet as one would do to try to find Adam online, but she figured he may have been adopted again and given a new name or at least a new last name. She didn't really know because Valerie and Doug never mentioned it. They gave very few updates on Adam. They had said over the years that they heard he was in a mental hospital or sometimes a group home, but there weren't really many updates given in the 9 years or so since he had left the Herrman family. Crystal couldn't find a trace of Adam anywhere she looked, so around Thanksgiving of 2008, a cousin suggested to Crystal that she should call the Department of Social and Rehabilitation Services, aka SRS, though that same department is now known as the Department of Child and Family Services in Kansas. They were in charge of foster children at the time, so maybe they could at least tell her something about Adam's placement after he left the Herrman home. I thought this would be protected information, but thankfully for this case, it turned out it wasn't. Or maybe it was open to Crystal because she was legally a relative. Regardless, SRS told her that Adam had been in the custody of Doug and Valerie Herrman up until 2005 when he turned 18, at which time he was no longer being tracked by the system. That was weird because after Adam was placed in state custody before his 12th birthday, he never came back home. She would have known if he aged out of care while in her parents' house. So Crystal hung up, a bit confused. She sat with it for a minute and then decided to call back. Instead of asking for more information, she told them what she knew, or at least what she was told from her parents. And the SRS worker she talked to confirmed that Adam absolutely was never taken back into care. His last known address was the place the Herrmans moved to after supposedly giving Adam back to the state. And they knew that updated address because the family was getting adoption subsidy checks for all 3 of the kids they had adopted. For those who don't know, sometimes when you adopt through foster care, you can get a monthly payment to help cover the costs of caring for that child until they're an adult. Not all foster care adoptions include a subsidy, but it's usually a case where the child may have ongoing special expenses like counseling or medical bills because the child has disabilities or suffered trauma. Sometimes it could be because they're harder to place due to age or because they're in a sibling group. The subsidy for Adam specifically, so that does not include the money that came in for his siblings, was initially around $300 a month, but it did adjust up as he got older, and by the time he turned 18 and the payments stopped, Valerie and Doug were getting just over $700 a month. Over the course of this phone call, Crystal and the SRS caseworker were both realizing something was very wrong, so they had an in-person meeting the next day. Crystal then disclosed more about the abuse and the neglect Adam suffered in the home, and the caseworker called the police to let them know that Adam Herrman was missing. It was late 2008, and no one had seen him in 9.5 years. Of course, the first place to go after gathering information from Crystal was right to Valerie and Doug Herrman's home. And when they were confronted with the facts that Adam was never returned to state care, their story changed. Doug and Valerie now said that Adam had actually run away during the first week of May 1999 after Valerie hit him with a belt. Because he had run off before, they waited for him to come back. When he didn't, they went out looking for him, but they couldn't find him. And then Adam stayed gone all night, which is something he had never done before. So they again waited to see if he would come back. Days turned into weeks, and at the 2-week mark, Valerie thought she should report him missing, but she changed her mind. Their excuse was that if they reported Adam missing and Valerie had to admit she hit him with a belt again after she was warned not to do it, they might lose custody of the younger 2 children as well. So in spite of Adam being a month shy of 12 years old and without any means of taking care of himself out on the streets, they decided to move on with their lives. In the fall of 2009, around 4 months after Adam went missing, the family moved again, 40 minutes away from Towanda. So if Adam was alive and well and tried to come back, he wouldn't be able to find them. If you remember back to my episode on Allie Lowitzer, her mom kept Allie's cell phone connected to service for 12 years, costing her thousands of dollars just in case Allie was out there and tried to get her cell phone to work again. And if you're familiar with the missing Beaumont children in Australia, in that case, the parents kept their home for 20 years after the children disappeared, just in case they came looking for them one day. Not Valerie and Doug Herrman, though. They up and left 4 months later and never told anyone Adam was missing. Not only did they not report him missing, they pretended to the U.S. government, at least, that he was still living with them. Every year on their income taxes, they listed him as a dependent. And every year they had to file their self-report with the state to continue to get their adoption subsidy, they listed him as being in the home. 4 years after Adam disappeared, the Herrmans filed for divorce and they listed him as one of the minor children. The two ended up reconciling and the case was dismissed, so this was a chance for his disappearance to get noticed, but it didn't go that far. When Adam's older biological sister tried to find Adam and the younger siblings when she was around 16, she did get in touch with Valerie, who told her that Adam was fine, but Valerie wouldn't let her talk to him. Based on the timeline, he was very likely already missing. The sister tried to call again a few years later, and Valerie told her never to call back because, according to Valerie, the kids didn't know they were adopted, and she didn't want them to find out. As you can imagine, when this case hit the news, people vilified Doug and Valerie Herrman. They were accused of murdering Adam, or at least Valerie was, and they were accused of covering it up. That's mostly where Doug comes in. Initially, they denied the accusations through their attorney, but then they made a tricky decision for anyone at the center of a missing child case. They decided to do a sit-down interview with Tim Potter with the Wichita Eagle. The Wichita Eagle, and particularly Tim Potter, were on it with this reporting. Tim Potter got interviews with Adam's adoptive parents, various relatives. He was requesting records. He had multiple front-page, full-length articles on the case almost daily when it first broke in January of 2009. I don't imagine he slept much. And his interview with Doug and Valerie was interesting. They told the running away story again and how they were afraid of losing the other two kids. Somehow that justified all of their actions and inactions after Adam disappeared. But they did say they felt guilty about taking the adoption subsidy money. But it seems like they spent it all the same. The Herrmans admitted it was a mistake not to report Adam missing and that they loved him. And interestingly, they denied most of the accusations of abuse. Valerie only admitted that she hit Adam with a belt twice. The one time the therapist turned her into the state and the time that prompted Adam to run away for the last time. And she confessed to locking him in the bathroom, but she claimed the story was being twisted. According to Valerie and Doug, Adam had made threats to kill them, and they found knives under his pillow when he was just 8 years old. So on the advice of his therapist, they secured him overnight so that they could sleep. They turned the bathroom doorknob around so it locked from the outside, and they made him a little bed in the bathtub, and he had pillows and blankets and a sleeping bag. They said it was only at night, it only occurred for a couple of months, and that Adam was never chained or tied to anything. So the multiple people, their own family members, who said that they saw Adam getting hit with more frequency than twice, hit with a belt more often than that, and saw him locked in a bathroom for hours during the day, those people were all liars. What Doug and Valerie said in this interview was predictable. Deny, deflect, claim everyone else is lying, and downplay the few things they admitted happened. I expected all that, so I just read the article, taken my notes, and then I got to one spot where I was literally stopped by something Valerie said. It actually made me angry. She said that they never stopped praying for Adam. These two people, the only ones who knew Adam was missing, the only two people in the world that knew a child was out on the streets alone or roaming the prairie or wherever they thought an 11-year-old would wind up, the only ones who could have reported Adam missing, decided that praying for him was good enough, and that it was worth mentioning that in their attempt at a PR interview. I mean, it's not just that they didn't do anything when Adam went missing. We've seen that. We've seen parents or spouses who don't really involve themselves in the searching or whatnot. What Doug and Valerie did was the next level from that. They lied and deceived to stop other people from looking for him. The question that the journalist and everyone else was trying to get to the center of here was what happened to Adam. And Doug was asked what he thought. And he said he thought Adam moved on, changed his name, and was out there living his life somewhere. Now, I would have loved to have the opportunity to ask Doug 2 follow-up questions. 1, has he ever met an 11-year-old? And 2, how in the world does he think an 11-year-old, who he claimed was bipolar or schizophrenic, did any of that? The answer to my follow-up questions for many is that Doug didn't think any of that because he and Valerie knew exactly what happened to Adam Herrman. And it's not just random people who think that. In January of 2009, not long after the case broke in the news, the county attorney announced that Doug and Valerie Herrman were suspects in the disappearance of Adam Herrman. And we know their theory of the crime because of the media. Journalists were trying to request the records of Adam's time in foster care and any reports to child services about the abuse. SRS investigations are generally not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests due to privacy concerns, but Kansas does have an exception for some situations. If a child dies or nearly dies from abuse and or neglect, the media can get the records. The prosecutor went to court to try to keep the records under seal for a period of time, but the argument wasn't that they weren't going to be released because Adam wasn't dead. They argued that the allegations of abuse would release the names of potential witnesses and interfere with the investigation, so they wanted time to get statements from those witnesses before their names were released to the general public. So we know from the start that the authorities looking for Adam Herrman were looking for a body. They first went out to the mobile home park in Towanda where the family lived, and they excavated the site around where their home had been. They then went to where the mobile home was currently located, since the Herrmans had taken it with them when they left Towanda. The new owners of that home said that the police searched the bathroom and tested for blood. Search teams also searched the Whitewater River near Towanda on more than one occasion. They brought in dogs to aid in many of these searches, and since they were expecting to find a child's bones, they also had anthropologists at the excavations. And they took DNA from Adam's birth family in the event they found something. The sheriff held a press conference and said that they did find something relevant to the case that answered one of their questions, but they have never revealed what they found. And when asked if they found physical evidence, the answer was simply that they have not found a body. In March of 2009, the investigative files were turned over to the prosecutors, but unfortunately, there was not enough evidence to charge anyone with anything related to Adam's disappearance. They did charge Valerie and Doug Herrman with felony fraud because of the adoption subsidy. They had taken nearly $53,000 from May of 2009 when they say Adam ran away until he would have turned 18. The couple ended up taking a plea deal in that case. The amount they were accused of defrauding the government was lowered from the over $52,000 down to around $15,000 because that was how much it was for the months that the state could absolutely prove Adam was not in their care. Now, I wouldn't have wanted to give these two a plea deal at all. I would rather push this thing to trial and start asking them some questions, but I'm not a lawyer, and the Herrmans were unlikely to answer any of the questions I have due to their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, so maybe this was the only reasonable outcome. The plea deal came with the state recommending no jail time, just 12 months probation, plus they would have to pay fines and restitution. But the judge was not agreeable to that. He let both of their defense attorneys know ahead of sentencing that he was planning on giving Doug and Valerie jail time. He said they deserved it because their theft involved the, quote, abandonment and exploitation of a child, end quote. But the reason he was telling the defense attorneys this ahead of time was to give them a chance to argue otherwise. And that's what they tried to do. They tried to argue for probation, but the judge was not swayed by anything they said. He said Adam deserved to be reported missing so people could look for him, and he called Doug and Valerie's actions, quote, callous and emotionally detached, and the calculated abandonment of a child whose interests were traded for money, end quote. And then the judge gave them the maximum under the state sentencing grid. Valerie got 7 months in prison, and Doug, who had a previous felony for writing a bad check, got 9 months. It was definitely enough time to disrupt their lives significantly. They weren't wealthy people. They were both working at a meatpacking plant at the time of their arrests. If you and your partner both went to prison for 7 to 9 months, going without any income, how would you stay afloat? Who's paying your rent? Who's making your car payment? And then when you get released, you have $20,000 in fines and restitution to pay back. That's a huge debt. So while it could be argued they weren't punished enough, they were punished. The two served their time and they were released. Then Kansas became one of the states to pass Kaylee's Law in 2012. This was in response to the Caylee Anthony case, and in Kansas, also because of the Adam Herrman case. They made it a crime to not report a child under the age of 13 missing. This type of law also came up in the Madalena Kojikari case, which I covered last year, Season 6, Episode 36, if you want to go listen to that. And those are the charges that her mother and stepfather ended up facing. But in this case, Adam went missing well before the law was even considered, so no charges could be filed. In July of 2016, Doug Herrman died of natural causes, but no deathbed admissions came. In fact, in his obituary under his surviving relatives, they listed Adam. There have been no credible sightings of Adam Herrman since 1999. In 2020, there was a Twitter account that popped up that was @Herrman_Adam, and the user was claiming to be Adam and tagged several news outlets. He posted 2 videos on YouTube claiming that he was the victim of sex trafficking, and quite unfortunately, Adam's family saw this and reached out to the police hoping it was him. Of course it wasn't, it was a hoax. The person behind the accounts was identified, and the sheriff said he knew for a fact that this man was not Adam. He knew the family, and they knew that this was not a child they somehow acquired as a preteen, and he was actually 8 years younger than Adam. The only positive on this was that it got Adam's case in the media again. There were no charges that could be pressed against the person perpetrating the hoax, and I'm not going to name him because he died about 2 weeks after. He was young, and it sounds like he was troubled. Since then, there really haven't been many updates. If alive today, Adam Herrman would be 38 years old. He has brown hair and blue eyes, and at the time, he wore gold wire-framed glasses. According to the Doe Network, he has a birthmark on his back along the waistline, numerous scars on his abdomen, and a scar on his left inner thigh. If you know anything, you can call the Butler County Sheriff's Department at 316-322-4254 or NCMEC at 1-800-THE-LOST.